Welcome to our Investment for All podcast. One of our goals is to provide economics and finance knowledge and skills through a podcast of in-depth discussion on key topics such as inflation and investment, a universal problem almost all of society faces. We have been discussing inflation since the summer. So far, 2 months of CPI have shown a welcome surprise to the downside in November and October. If we are having a good December, January, and February month to month, would that be enough to conclude that inflation is under control? That's before the March Fed meeting.
The Fed is open to data dependent with pausing mode if we have these months of deflationary data. Monthly CPI, PPI, and unemployment rates are key data to watch. Data dependent means rate raise or pause depends on economic data. Financial analysts and fund managers always look at monthly data for consumer price inflation, PPI for raw material and component cost for productions, and unemployment rate for wage inflation.
Over the last few months, the Fed was doing proactive tightening. Right now, a lot of consumer goods are in price decreasing mode. Cars, airline tickets, and medical services. We might also start a deflationary process. Shelter inflation is a delayed measure. It has less relationship with the absolute price of housing. If housing prices peak, then the shelter inflation is zero. If it decreases month to month, then it is negative inflation or deflation.
Good points, David. We should also pay attention to wage inflation. During the pandemic, the US has roughly lost over a few million working forces due to early retirement, immigration policy, as well as some people choosing to live on government subsidy. Wage inflation might be more sticky than many people expected.
Yes, unemployment rates and wage increases are very important. Wage increases have a reflexive relationship with CPI. In one direction, inflation pushes an individual's cost of living higher. Thus, most companies tie wage increases with CPI. In the other direction, increasing wages will increase the consumer demand, thus increasing the price of goods and services, which will be the definition of inflation. Job opening data is one of the metrics people use to forecast the wage inflation direction.
Yes, this question is the most challenging. As Powell emphasized in the post-Fed meeting press conference, objectively speaking, it is really tricky. A group of people died early and were scared away, but in the end, they needed the Fed to balance it out. We also see many big corporations such as Intel, Meta, and Google start layoffs, while blue-collar workers are still in serious shortage. This labor supply imbalance will make wage inflation more sticky and longer.
Frankly speaking, Chairman Jay Powell has a tough job to do in 2023. There are a few choices for what Jay Powell can do. Here are my thoughts. One is the Fed can crush the demand and crush job openings. Another is that the central government increases legal immigrants for skilled laborers.
2023 is a challenging year for Fed policy to manage inflation. Some services related to inflation might last longer than people thought. David, have you traveled recently? If so, has it come to your attention that hotel and air ticket prices doubled and almost tripled? The food prices in the restaurants also tripled, and the restaurants are expecting outrageous 20% tips. Hotel, flight, and restaurants are all full. These are inflationary signs because they are services related to inflation.
That is true. There are some parts of inflation which are going to cool down in 2023. For example, in the early part of 2022, some goods price increase was partly due to the supply constraint and China lockdown. After China reopened, supply will not be a problem. Thus, the battling inflation is shifted from goods inflation to services inflation, where wage increases is the key. Back to wage increase pressure, non-farm payroll decreased from the 500,000 range to now of the 200,000 range. I think we will see the non-farm payroll below 200,000 either in January or February's data.
Yes, this is exactly the effect of the Fed's cooling demand efforts. I think if high inflation lasts longer than expected in 2023, the Fed needs to maintain the high interest rate for a long period of time. The economic recession is almost inevitable in 2023.
Hopefully, we can get CPI and PPI data coming down sequentially in the first few months of 2023. Unemployment rate needs to increase for the Fed to consider a pause in 2023. I'm sure the inflation has peaked, but now the biggest issue is how long the relatively high inflation will last and how long it will affect and how long it will cost the economy to bring down inflation back to its 2% level.
Yes, in in 2023, we see the economy and Fed is still fighting inflation, especially service inflation and wage increase pressure. Historically, it is a long-term battle. It may take 5 to 10 years before inflation is under control, and I think the 2% inflation rate target might be too optimistic. Don't forget, we still have the Russia-Ukraine war undergoing, and deglobalization is still a major trend, which are both inflationary.
I think inflation and higher interest rates will continue affecting everyday life. One of the goals for our Investment for All program is to provide information and analysis to people who want to navigate through this type of economic and financial turbulence. Edric, I think we should talk more about what kinds of investment people should look at in 2023, facing a lot of uncertainty of this economy and inflation. Let us talk about this in our next podcast. Thanks for watching Edric and David Fireside Chat. Please follow our channel. And lastly, any donations are welcome.